Hey, so I actually got my first question about homebrewing. I'm losing my light here a little bit, so I apologize if the light seems to be coming from right above me. It's because it is. So I got this question from, geez, who's this from? Sorry. Simply Thoughts and Ideas. Asked me, I just started homebrewing mead myself, and I was curious if you had any tips for a beginner. I really do, and most of my tips have to do with where you're getting your information and your recipes from. The first recipe that I ever made was from these like white upper middle class yuppies who like lived off the land and really honestly had no idea what they were doing, but because their blog was really popular and it looked really well done, I guess I just assumed that they would at least be able to put together a bottle of wine fine. And I'm actually going to show you what the result of this experiment was, but essentially they were like, oh, just put some fruit into a bucket and squish it and then put some like plastic wrap over the top and poke a hole in it and let it sit for a few days, and then it'll just magically become wine, and then you dump it out, and then like 2 weeks later you bottle it. And that's like really, yes, I suppose you could make wine like that if you're really lucky, but more than likely what you're going to end up with is something that looks like this. And I don't know if you can tell or not from this, but this entire top layer is mold. Gross, disgusting, probably will kill you mold. This batch became infected. This was a peach wine that I started in August, a while ago, probably a few Augusts ago, and I've kept this as an example. No, it doesn't smell or anything. I kept it as an example of what you don't want to do when you start winemaking or mead making. Obviously, mead is a type of wine. And that is take instructions from someone who has no experience in food service, who has no experience with sanitation, and has no experience in truly like mead making, wine making. So some of the tips that I'm going to give you right off the bat should be things that are really obvious to you, but weren't obvious to me, so I do understand. So the first thing and the most important thing about mead making, hands down, before ingredients, before equipment, is sanitation. Like, you have to sanitize everything, and I'm talking about a 5% bleach solution. So for every 95 parts of water, you've got 5 parts of bleach. And that's about a cap full or 2 per gallon. Everything, every single thing that comes in contact with your brew needs to be sanitized. All of the utensils, the counters, if you're using cutting boards to cut your fruit and stuff, your sinks, your measuring cups, your demijohns or carboys, everything has to be sanitized. You need to understand that if you do not sanitize stuff, you are going to waste a ton of money because your stuff is more than likely going to get infected, and if you don't realize that it's infected and you drink it, you can make yourself and others very sick, and that is just angering. So beyond sanitation, having a clean space, having plenty of time, like realize that when you're doing a brew day that it's probably going to take about 8 hours from start to finish. Even if you're just brewing a gallon of something, give yourself plenty of time to do brewing in a very clean environment. Like, don't have your counters filled with stuff. Again, this is another great example of this. There are people who say that you can just cover your wine or your mead with a balloon is one with a hole poked in it, with saran wrap with a hole poked in it, with cheesecloth or a piece of cloth. And the reason why a lot of those don't work, besides the fact that they're not very sanitary, is because you do not want any more air than what's already in your demijohn to come in contact with your brew, because it will oxidize and it will turn it into vinegar. So if you want vinegar, go for it, but otherwise it's going to ruin it, like, completely. An issue a lot of times is fruit flies, and fruit flies carry specific bacteria that will affect your wine or mead in different ways. So the reason why you don't use a balloon too is just that air can go back into it. So while your stuff is brewing, obviously it's pushing out gases. So if this were a good batch and it did have an airlock on it, I wouldn't have an issue, because the airlock would keep any air from flowing back in, and the only thing that would be in here is the CO2 that's being produced by my wine. However, when you're using a hole poked in a balloon, obviously air can still pass in and out. So that's a problem. So you don't use balloons. Buy yourself an airlock, for God's sake. The airlock and the bung that it typically will come with costs you it's like $1.50 for that. I mean, just go to a homebrew store. You can order them on Amazon. You can order them from Northern Brewer or any of the major brewers online. It's totally worth it. Get yourself some standard size. This is a half gallon. There's also gallon size demijohns. There's 2-gallon demijohns, and then you start talking carboys. So you can get like the 5-gallon carboys, which I don't have any in here because they're just huge. They also make like better bottles and stuff, and if you are a small person or you're just not very good at lifting things like me, you might want to go with better bottles because they are plastic. But you don't need a whole shit ton of equipment to get started either. I don't want you to get the impression you have to spend thousands of dollars. When we're talking about equipment, the things that you absolutely are going to need, obviously, besides a nice, clean space to work, you'll need all the basics. You'll need measuring cups. You might need like a Pyrex measuring cup that measures liquids better. You'll need a sharp knife, you'll need a demijohn or 2, preferably 2 so you can transfer over to a secondary so that your stuff can brew longer. You'll need your airlock and your bung. You will need something to get it out, and so ideally, if I'm gonna get a different one, so just hold on a second. Okay, sorry. So this is what you want. This is a screw-on plastic bung and an airlock that is secured inside of it. So I know you can't tell in this one, but you're gonna have a bit of sediment at the bottom. So you're gonna want to probably invest in a long piece of food grade hose that is also sanitized every time you use it, and then you'll be able to siphon off all the liquid off the top into whether you're bottling or whether you're just racking it into another vessel. If you want to go ahead and spend the $15 for an auto siphon, it's totally worth it. It makes things go way faster, especially if you're doing 5-gallon batches. You don't have to suck half-done wine or gross flat beer out of anything. So beyond that, read everything you can. I don't want to make this too long because there's everything beyond that you sort of get into intermediate stuff. Read everything you can. I would say if you have a homebrew store, go and talk to the people there, to talk to them about what they do. Some of the easiest things to brew are going to be your Ancient Origin Mead is a really easy one. Sorry, I lost my train of thought and I heard a noise and I was like, what's that? Yeah, so your Ancient Origin Mead is a really easy one. Any of your plain show meads, so just using honey and water and yeast. For beers, you can do extract kits. For wines, I would say wine is more difficult, and honestly, if you're going to do a fruit wine, I would say hold off until you have a better grasp of how everything works together, because it's expensive. Fruit is expensive unless you get it for free, and the yield isn't that great. Beyond that, the only other thing I would talk about is yeast really quickly, and do not use bread yeast. Do not ever, bread yeast is for bread. Bread yeast is for making bread and baked goods. Bread yeast is not for making mead and wine. Just do not do it. I swear to God, it's going to taste awful, and anyone who's going to comment on this video will be like, I made this thing with bread wine, it was so good. And I'm just going to be like, you know what? Just shut up, because clearly you haven't had good mead or wine and you're just making shit up. It's not good. I've tried it. It's disgusting. Learn which yeasts work with which types of wine. Obviously, I personally, for most of my meads and my red wines, I use Montrachet, which is a brand, or which is a type that you can get through the Red Star brand. I use some of the most basic mead wines. So there's the D47, I think, and the EC 1888. Or 1887. I might be messing this up, so I'll try to, if you guys want to know more about yeast, I can tell you about that. I can go look them up really quick, because it's been a while since I've actually had a wine brew day. I've been doing a lot of beer recently. But anyway, long story short, you honestly just do not use bread yeast. Use something better, and you can look that up very easily. Just type into Google, what type of yeast should I use for hard cider or honey wine or red wine or whatever. So those are my tips. Don't get discouraged. It took me more than a year to even make my first batch of something that didn't go wrong within the first 2 weeks, and I really honestly can say that besides my beer, which I think is pretty solid, I have yet to make or at least yet to finish a mead that has been like an outstanding mead. My meads that I think are going to be outstanding need to age for at least another year. So with mead, you need to have patience. With beer, it's pretty fast moving, but you do need more equipment. So that's up to you. If you have any more specific questions, I would love to make videos about brewing. I honestly would love to talk about that to you guys. And I think that this format is really great for that, because I can give you a lot of information really fast, and I can link you to resources below. So I hope that that was helpful. And again, if you have any more questions about brewing or, you know, the other stuff that I talk about, you guys can feel free to inbox me on Tumblr.